On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we're a week out from Johnny Furphy having to decide if he's staying in the NBA draft. We're going to discuss what happens based on that decision.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. He's Nick Schwerdt. You can find him at Nick_Schwerdt. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be talking Johnny Furphy a week out from the decision. So we'll be breaking down that. I guess the decision could come at any moment now, whenever he has. But the deadline for doing that is the 29th, the midnight of that. So a week out from that. We'll get to who cares, talking some other KU basketball, KU football, whose stat line is it anyway, to wrap things up. Thank you to tuning in to this episode of the show. Thank you to every dayers tuning in to each and every episode of Locked On Jayhawks here. So, Nick, 1 week out from decision day for early NBA draft entrants. And obviously there are some, I don't know, maybe interesting transfer portal targets that this applies to too. But for this episode, talking about Johnny Furphy and how this decision going one way or another affects 2024 to 2025. I guess before we get into like the effect of him coming back versus leaving, do you want to put a percentage on what you would think would be him coming back to school would be?
Well, you know, if to answer that question, I have to basically answer where I think he's going to get drafted. And
yeah, do you want some latest mock drafts? Because I have about 5 or 6.
Yeah, I want to hear some, because I was looking at a few earlier today, and I saw 2 mock drafts that previously had him in the first round. That previously had him, I think, as a late teens, early 20s, and both of them now have him in the early second. So I'm interested to see what you've found as well.
Yeah, so he's 23rd on ESPN, 18th on CBS Sports, 27th on Yahoo, 22nd on The Athletic, but all 4 of those were done before the week of the Combine, so we haven't seen an update there. The Ringer, which was also done before the Combine happened, had him 34th, which that one was interesting because it said, literally from Kevin O'Connor in the blurb, it said Furphy seems unlikely to stay in this year's draft class considering his youth and raw skills, but that seems to be counter with what other people are saying. And then maybe one of the ones you looked at was the one that was released on Tuesday, which was from Bleacher Report, and it had Johnny Furphy at 34th. And the blurb there mentioned his athletic test results were disappointing at the Combine, and a 189-pound frame at his size suggests he's at least a year from being physically ready for NBA minutes. Now, what I think is interesting there about that comment, and this is probably where the biggest debate I think lies between the people who are like, he needs to go in the NBA or he should come back or whatever, is you get the people who are saying he should come back to college because he can develop his game a little bit more and he'll be more NBA ready when he goes. Then you get the counter to that, which is the people saying, why can't he work on his game while he's in the NBA and develop while he is in the NBA when it is his job? And I do think there is 100% validity to that. I also do think there is something that people don't talk about a lot, which is, you know, when you invest a draft pick in a guy, the clock is ticking as soon as you bring him on, right? You only have 2-3 years before you have to make a decision on like a team option if we're bringing the guy back. It's easy to say the NBA team, hey, we're going to bring him on and develop him and let him sit for a year and then he's going to play. But a lot of times that happens and then they're like, oh, this guy's 2 years from being able to play, and then he ends up on another team before he has success. But anyway, there's the info on the mock drafts. So what percentage would you like to put on it?
I'll tell you the percentage I think of him coming back is higher now than it was before the Combine.
Mm-hmm.
I think before the Combine, I probably would have put it at like a 25% chance he comes back. I still think more likely than not he's going to stay in the NBA draft, but it might be closer to 60-40 right now because everything you just laid out. Johnny Furphy wants to get to the NBA at his highest possible value, right? Where at what point in time will the NBA be highest on you? Now, the answer to that probably would have been halfway through last season, but you have to ask yourself, is there a chance that my value is going to be higher next year? And then you also ask yourself the worst case scenario, is there a chance my value is lower? Where do those final numbers come out? Like if at your floor, are you still getting drafted? Because right now we know he's not at his ceiling. That much we know, or at least we think we know. But he could be in the same position next year, be a year older. So NBA teams, like you mentioned, they don't want to take unnecessary risk on a guy just because he's young, just because he's 18 years old or 19 years old, whatever Furphy is, to say, oh yeah, we're getting him at the best possible chance. No, because the flip side is we haven't seen that much of him and we're not sure he's that good. You laid it out. Yep. He's skinny. He's not an explosive athlete. Like, yes, he can finish above the rim, but he's not somebody that screams explosion. He doesn't have long arms. I think he was like 6'7.5" with 6'8" wingspan. Mm-hmm. So I'm struggling to find the one thing with him that NBA teams are going to look at and say, we can't pass that up, which is why I think there is debate over whether or not he's a first round pick, because there are some things to like. There are some cons with his game, which is kind of a weird spot to be in if you're Johnny Furphy and trying to make this decision.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that 60-40, but still, that means both of us are leaning toward him staying in the draft. So let's start there. Your first reaction, you see the breaking news, wherever you're getting the news from, that he is going to stay in the NBA draft. What would be your first reaction?
I don't think I would have much of a reaction, to be honest with you, because like we've talked about all offseason, this is kind of what we expected to happen. So if I hear that he's staying in the draft, I say, okay, like AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, it's your time. Even guys like Zeke Mayo. I know that we always get into the position battles and the guys who are potentially gunning for certain spots, but as we know, it can be very fluid between the secondary guards and the wings. You can interchange them. You can play 3 wings. You can play 2 point guards. So it really affects all of the guys, specifically the incoming transfers. And then there's a trickle-down effect from there if you want to get into dudes like Raquise Passmore and say, okay, well, now there's one less guy for you to have to beat out in order to get minutes on this team. So I think because I've been operating all offseason with the idea that he's not coming back, it wouldn't really change anything. Him staying in the draft, now that would probably change my thought process and the guys that I'm looking to have specific roles a little bit more than him deciding to stay in the draft.
Right. And for me, it almost becomes a little bit of, oh, he stayed in the draft. Who is Kansas going to get next? Like that becomes my immediate reaction of what guy is Kansas going to get? What other players are going to stay in the draft process? Who's going to still be available there? Because it feels like to me, if he comes back, like maybe your roster's just kind of set, at least as far as like the real rotation players you're going to be going after. Maybe you add somebody who's more developmental.
I want to, on that note, by the way, I think the rotation is set. Mm-hmm. If Furphy comes back, okay, cool. Now we start to do the math. Who's the odd man out? But if Furphy stays in the draft, this rotation's set. And I know that there are names. I get it. Yeah. I know that people want to get this kid from BYU. I know that like, oh, what about this guy? What about that? That's fine. I'm not denying that there are talented players out there that could potentially be in this rotation. I'm telling you, I'm looking at KU's roster for next year, and I see 8. I see 9 guys. I don't really see a hole that KU needs to go and fill.
Sure. I think it would be less about that, and maybe it would be one of the few years that, and I'm going to do an episode on this at some point, because I actually went back and looked at the rotation each and every year under Bill Self to be like, did he ever stretch it to maybe 9 deep in a year where maybe they were a little bit deeper? And when you're talking rotation, it's a little difficult to quantify because you're talking like, are you talking total minutes? Are you talking games played, minutes per game? Are you talking about when it's NCAA tournament time and the game's on the line? But like you could go back to, for instance, I don't know, the 2011 team, which that team was pretty loaded. They had basically a 9-man rotation that year, you know, and by some metrics, they had a 10-man rotation that year. So I do think it's possible they could get balloon up if Furphy came back or if they did land, say, a Jackson Robinson or something like that. But yeah, I do think it's I don't know, it's going to be hard to crack the rotation for any new player if they're not like really, really good. Okay, flip side of this, if Johnny Furphy does decide to return, you see that news, what would be your first reaction?
Can I cuss on here? Right?
Go
like
for it.
That's holy shit. Holy shit. They were already the number 1 team in the country preseason. And now you return a guy who was your 3rd, arguably 2nd best player last year. It's like one of those good problems to have. If you get Johnny Furphy back, I'm sure dudes like AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin are going, wait a minute. The coaches told me he was for sure going pro, right? Because those conversations were had, by the way. When Bill Self and Curtis Townsend and Norm Roberts are out there recruiting these guys, Johnny Furphy and his NBA decision comes up in probably all of those conversations and those recruitments. They're saying, hey, listen, we're losing a lot. We're losing 2 of our top 3 scorers from last year. Oh, what about Furphy, coach? Oh, yeah, he's gone. Yeah, we're not expecting him to come back, which at the time they may have actually believed. You bring Furphy back into the mix. One of these guys who we've spent the last month and a half talking about their role, how they fit, why it's a great fit, why we're high on them. One of them is going to play more of a secondary role on this team, or bye-bye, right? They're going to say, you know what? On second thought, maybe I'm going to reopen this recruitment. There were a couple other pitches that were pretty enticing. Maybe I'll revisit those, because Furphy's going to play. Like Furphy, I don't care what you think about any of these incoming guys and how good they are or how good they would have been on last year's team. I know that I've said KJ Adams is going to see a reduced role in this team. Johnny Furphy is not. Johnny Furphy is going to be a starter. He is going to play 30 plus minutes a night. He is going to be one of the go-to guys for this team offensively. So we can argue about who's going to lose out a spot, but I don't see Johnny Furphy losing playing time to any of the guys that KU brought in.
Yeah, and I do think, it affects Griffin and Storr. Maybe the minutes go down a few here or there. Maybe the possessions, the shots go down a few here or there. But honestly, the name you mentioned, KJ Adams, is the one where I find it most intriguing, because it's like all this conversation that seems to be pretty divisive among KU fans. Is KJ going to be in the starting lineup or is he not? I think it becomes easier to get to the avenue of not if Furphy comes back, because at that point, like, you brought Rylan Griffin over as a starter from a Final Four team. Is he really coming off the bench? Like, AJ Storr was all Big Ten second team. He was going to be all Big Ten preseason team this year. Is he really coming off the bench? Like, obviously, DeJuan and Hunter aren't coming off the bench. Furphy coming off the bench. He's going back from being a possible first-round pick to come back to school, to come off the – you know what I mean? Like, you start to make it a little bit easier to get to that conversation of maybe it makes KJ off the bench. And that would be my, I think, first reaction.
Yeah, and I think KJ's coming off the bench. It's just a matter of how many minutes is he going to play. And you have to start getting into these conversations of, okay, let's say we play – Furphy, Storr, Griffin, all of them are playing 30 minutes a night. And then we've still got Zeke Mayo. We've still got Raquise Passmore. You got Flory. Like, whoever you think is going to be in that rotation, you start getting into these combos of what does KJ bring to the table that those guys can't, and vice versa. And I think it will become increasingly difficult for KJ to have feathers in his cap to say, oh yeah, but I can do this, because those guys are all 6'7", 6'8" athletes who can shoot. And with KJ, you're 6'5", you're an athlete, but you can't shoot. You don't really rebound that well. You're kind of a liability on defense. I'm not trying to bag on the guy, but these are the real conversations that this coaching staff's going to have as they try to figure out this rotation.
All right, we're going to continue on. Who cares? A little talk about some of the recent walk-on additions, some football stuff on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Continuing on here with another episode of Who Cares? We're going to talk about 2 subjects, then figure out which one you care a little bit more on. So this was news that came out yesterday. Big 12 presidents and chancellors voted unanimously to authorize House settlement terms of the NCAA case right now, which basically means there's this case going on where a bunch of these schools and conferences are going to have to pay back past athletes for NIL stuff, and they're coming to a settlement that basically could lead to basically schools would pay, say, around $20 million per year out of their own money, and, read more details on the stuff, but kind of interesting there. Or College Football 25, the video game coming out in July. What do you care more about?
I mean, you know the answer. You know the answer to this. You set me up, because this is the easiest Who Cares I've ever been a part of. You talking about one thing like the NCAA's ongoing fight towards amateurism and paying players that I don't care about at all. Just tell me how it ends, right?
Yeah.
I want to skip right to the season finale, and that's it. I don't need to see episodes 1 through 9. Meanwhile, something I've been waiting a decade for, patiently, mind you. I am so excited to waste so much time, be so unproductive, be a terrible partner to my fiance, be a terrible friend to anybody who's not playing that game, because I'm going to have an online dynasty. I'm going to take Kansas to the college football playoff. We're going to win titles. We're going to recruit 5 stars. We may even join the SEC. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to take the reins of a program in this college football game. And no matter how good or bad it is, it will be the greatest game ever to me. I fail to see, even with my lofty expectations, how it's not going to meet and surpass them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm way more psyched about the second thing. Okay, KU adding a walk-on and Noah Shelby, who's going to redshirt after he transferred from Rice, or KU adding an in-state walk-on and Will Thengvall.
So I haven't exactly grinded the tape on Will Thengvall. Can you tell me anything about him?
I can tell you that he's a shooter. I can tell you that I talked to some people who saw him play in the 5A state tournament or whatever and said that this kid's really good. But it's also a walk-on. So you remember we did this with I've started to try to pump the brakes on this happening, but it feels like every few years there's a walk-on that comes on where it's like he's better than a lot of the other walk-ons the KU brings on. You know what I mean? He's legitimate to enough to play at a really good D2 or maybe
Garrett
a lower level.
Lewinstra.
Exactly. And that's what I was thinking of. And we talk ourselves into, maybe by the time they're a senior, they could be a 7th, 8th man. They could be Connor Tehan, and it never happens. I mean, there are instances, right? Matt Kleiman, who's running for something in office right now, right? Connor Tehan, I guess, but I don't know.
I can see where you're kind of directing me. You're kind of hurting me to one answer, but I'm actually going to, just because you did that, I'm actually going to go with Will Thengvall. Am I saying
it's a great last name?
It's a great last name. He looks exactly how I pictured. I just looked him up on Twitter. I'm not really that interested in either one of these guys because, as you said, they're walk-ons. I know Noah Shelby maybe was a little bit more highly touted coming out of high school, but sign me up. You know what? I'm ready to be wrong again. Will Thengvall is the next great hope from the state of Kansas, and I think he is going to be, on that short list of guys like Tehan and Matt Kleiman, and that's pretty much it. But he's going to be number 3.
Okay, I love that. I mean, that'll just open up so many different, for the KU students who are camping, lots of names you can work with that with.
Oh, yeah.
So that's great. Okay, last one here. KU football recruiting Bryce Foster, the transfer center from Texas A&M, or Happy Gilmore making a sequel?
Again, I think you know exactly which way I'm going to go with this. Happy Gilmore making a sequel. Unfortunately, unlike college football playoff, which I waited 10 years for, we've been waiting 20 plus years for Happy Gilmore. And unlike the college football video game, my hopes for this are much lower. I'm not expecting to be blown away. Sequels very rarely do well. Comedy sequels hardly ever do well, especially ones where you try to take 20 years off. Did you see the Dumb and Dumber sequel? Did that do it for you? It's like if they tried to come back and do Wedding Crashers, I would go see it. Trust me, I'll see it. I'll watch it the first day it comes out, but I'm not going into it expecting it to be like a classic comedy that lives up to the expectations.
But see, it's two different Adam Sandlers too, right? That was prime Adam Sandler. This is I don't even know what the
Adam Sandler who might be a billionaire now, yet doesn't really seem too keen on making great movies. Our tastes change, comedy in general change, these comedians change. So my expectations are low, but if it just gives me a few little callbacks to the first one, some inside jokes, the lines, the one-liners that we've been repeating with our friends for 2 decades, that alone will make it worth it. I went and saw the Anchorman sequel one time. I didn't watch it a second time. My friends and I didn't talk about it afterwards. We weren't saying, oh my God, did you see that one scene, where Brick did the same thing that he did in the first movie, but it was good. No, it won't be anything like that. It's going to get a billion watches on Netflix, right? It will be the most streamed movie on Netflix, and then everybody will get on Twitter to talk about how much it sucked. We know how this is going to go, but that's okay. That's okay.
For me, it's Bryce Foster, just because I don't think it's going to be very good, and I'm not going to let it ruin the first one.
But Bryce Foster could not be very good.
Bryce Foster might not even be a Jayhawk. Who knows?
Right. So,
but I'm more interested
I feel like you're judging the movie unfairly compared to Bryce Foster, who you're just excited about knowing that
I am telling you, the movie is not going to be good. There is hope for Bryce Foster to be on Kansas.
You don't know that. You don't know that. I feel
pretty good about that. I would wager a very large sum that it will end up very poorly.
Yeah, an idea so good.
And honestly,
an idea so good, they waited 25 years. Yeah. Like at least with The Hangover, they knew they had something going good, so they just cranked out a couple sequels right away. Like get in while it's hot. Usually if there's an idea that's really good, they don't sit on it for 2.5 decades.
Also, mistake not to call it Happier Gilmore. But all right, let's finish up. Whose stat line is it anyway on Locked On Jayhawks? All right, we're back for whose stat line is it anyway. I'm going to give a stat to Nick, and he's going to try to guess who it is. So this is a KU basketball stat. How many Kansas players had double-digit dunks this past season? You are a dunk aficionado.
I am a dunk aficionado. Thank you. Okay, so I know one, KJ Adams definitely had double-digit dunks.
He led the team with 59.
Hunter had a lot of buckets around the rim. How many dunks, though, I'm going to go with 3.
Okay, the correct answer is 4.
Okay.
Do you want to name the other 3 or try to?
Yeah. So I'm going to go KJ.
Yep.
Johnny Furphy.
Furphy is 4th with 11.
Okay. Hunter Dickinson.
He is 2nd with 17.
How about Parker Brown?
Parker Brown is 3rd at 13. I did not think you would get that one.
Yeah, you always love throwing in some Parker Brownies. Nobody talks more Parker Brown than you do.
I like how you just got Parker Brownie.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that like do anything for you that you had basically one guy who was like a good dunker? And I know we've gone into this before that like, I know it sounds silly because dunks are just fun and they're entertaining and it's fun to say and everything, but like legitimately the best teams dunk it a lot because you have a lot of good players, a lot of good transition plays, a lot of good athletes, stuff like that. It's not always the case, right? There's some teams that play below the rim, but like from Kansas's perspective, the best teams a lot of times have the most dunks. I don't know. Does that stat mean anything to you?
Well, yeah, it does mean something to me, but I would take it a step further and say that the best teams get most of their buckets from dunks and threes. KU got a terrible combination of none of that, right? They didn't dunk it well and they didn't shoot threes. I think next year's team is going to be much more proficient from shooting. And while they may not dunk as much, Hunter Dickinson, a pretty efficient post scorer. I know that kind of goes against like conventional analytics and what they think good shots are versus bad shots. But if you have the very best of the person who does that in Hunter, then I think I'm okay with that being the starting combination of how KU is going to get their offense.
All right. Well, how many dunks did KU add? This is the next question. Quick follow-up to that. More dunks. AJ Storr plus Zeke Mayo plus Rylan Griffin, or Hunter Dickinson plus Elmarco Jackson plus Kevin McCullough.
I'm gonna say the transfers. I feel like AJ Storr had quite a bit of dunks. I don't really know about Rylan Griffin.
AJ Storr had 27, so he would have finished second on KU last year. Zeke Mayo only had 1, and then Rylan Griffin had 8, so they had 36 total. Hunter Dickinson had 17, Kevin McCullough had 9, Elmarco Jackson had 4, so 30 total. So yes, the transfers had more.
Why'd you include Hunter Dickinson or Kevin McCullough? He's gone.
Well,
you just needed to hit your number. You needed to hit your number.
Just wanted to make it close, you know.
Okay, fair enough.
If I would have given you, I don't know, Zach Clemens, like you would have known as 0.
Pretty easy. Yeah.
If I would have given you DeJuan Harris, you know, same thing. Mm-hmm. All right. Where can you find your work? What do you have going on right now?
You can check out my podcast, Could Be Wrong, and wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube.
All right. He's Nick Schwerdt. I'm Derek Johnson. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back next time for another player deep dive on LOJ.